Welcome everybody, I'm Denise Applegate-Schober and this is Best Practices when Frame Quilting. And this is a webinar that's sponsored by Tin Lizzie. So they're looking to help you learn as much as possible in the future with your quilting frame, your machine, your robotic system, whether you have the Quilt Magician or which one you have. So we decided that the first lesson that we were going to do are some of the best practices when frame quilting. So this is going to go through a PowerPoint, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through the PowerPoint, and then we'll go to the frame and see exactly what I'm doing. So the PowerPoint first, and then we'll go to the frame. So the first thing we'll talk about is the frame. And the frame, what we need to know are the best practices for a frame, and what do we need to know when we're setting up our frame. And some of you have had your frame set up, so some of these things will not pertain to you, but new frame owners it will pertain to, or it also will pertain to people that haven't checked some of these things. And the very first thing you need to do when you have a frame is you need to make sure that it's level. And leveling your frame is so important. Now, my husband, when he helped me set up my frame, we had 3 levels. That's really important because we're going to level the machine, make sure the carriages are level, the rails, okay, your take-up rail, your backing rail, and the frame itself. And a lot of your frames have what are called leveling feet. They have ways that you can check to see how level things are, because maybe your house floors are not quite, in the best shape. Maybe they're wooden and they move, so maybe you have hardwood floors. Maybe you're on carpet that the frame has sunk in. So we're going to talk about how to level. So I have some levels here when we go to the video, and I'll show you that. We're going to talk at the frame about leaders and what's the best system for you. Now you're going to decide that. There are many systems out there on loading your frame. There are leaders, there are zippers, there are red snappers, there are pins. Some people sew their fabric to their leader. So we're going to talk about that when we go to the frame. We're also going to talk about batting. So I've got some questions for you about batting, okay? What type of batting do you pick? How do you know what type of batting to pick when you go to the frame? And these are questions you can answer in the chat section. How do you know if it's frame quality? Did you know that not all batting is made to go on a frame? When I first started frame quilting, I had some batting. Now, I didn't know that not every batting is made for the frame. And I put it on the frame and it started draping. It started puddling. It was like, whoa, what's going on with my batting? Well, I found out that batting's not made for frame quilting. Have you ever read the package of your batting? So there are lots of different packages of batting. How far apart will you quilt? How do you know how far apart to quilt? Okay, do you know the answers to this when you pick a certain batting? Is there a right or a wrong size to batting? That's a question that comes up a lot when I'm teaching at different stores and locations. Is there a right or wrong side to batting? There isn't really. There are battings that have scrim, and we'll talk about that. And there are battings that don't. There are fusible battings and non-fusible battings. So you might hear, and it's not wrong or right, that there is a wrong side to the batting or a right. There are some people that like the fusible on the back towards the backing. There are some people that like the fusible towards the top or your quilt top. There's scrim. Who knows what scrim is? what is scrim? Because some people like scrim, some people don't like scrim, and some people aren't really sure what scrim is. And the other thing you need to know is, do you pre-wash your batting? And is it a machine pre-wash or is it a hand pre-wash? And what's the shrinkage on the batting? Because that's going to help determine which batting you use. And what's the size of the batting? How much bigger than your quilt should your batting be? So we're going to go over all of those things. Now, let's talk about the scrim. Scrim is a cotton batting that has a sprayed or needle punched polyester in it. And what that does is it makes it so that we can quilt farther apart. So scrim isn't necessarily a bad thing unless you're a purist and you want all cotton fabric, all cotton batting, and all cotton thread. So don't be afraid of scrim because it will help you to not have to quilt so close together. Now, do you read your clothing tags in your garments? When you purchase clothing, do you read the tag to see how to take care of it? Okay? So this is a cleaning tag for a homeopathic cleaning only. So I just pulled this one off just to kind of give you an idea of what that is. Here's why. Because you need to start reading your batting packages to know about those questions that I ask. So this Dream Cotton, it's soft and warm and it's beautiful. It's a high grade of cotton, okay? It says there's no scrim, there's no glue, there's no binders. So it's 100% cotton. It can be hand or machine quilted. That's good to know because not all batting can be machine quilted. Some is only for hand quilting. It says the finished quilt may be gently machine washed and dried. Not all of them can be machine washed or dried. So that's really important to know. Can this go in the washer or not? Okay. The stitching may be up to 8 inches apart. So here's what I want you to do. This is what I did, and it works very well for me. I measured myself. I know that the distance in my hand, okay, is 7 inches. I know that the distance from my knuckles to my elbow is 17 inches. I have different measurements on myself because when I'm quilting, I can measure because how many times do you go to look for your tape measure and it's not where you need it? So I have certain measurements for the quilting specific on myself that when I walk up to the frame, I can go, oh, that's a little more than 7 inches, I'm pretty good, or that's 3 inches and I'm good there, okay? Pre-washing is not recommended. There are some battings that say you must pre-wash. How many of you have ever pre-washed your batting? Something to think about. So be sure to read the package of what you're going to do. Now, when we go to the frame, I'm going to tell you about some of the tools of the trade and things I can't live without. What are your favorite tools at the frame? And let's talk about them. Maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't have tools at your frame yet. And so I made a list here of my favorite tools, and I have them to show you how I utilize them at the frame. So best practices for me is habits that I've gotten into that I can't live without. So when you go to the frame, do you have habits you can't live without? Such as you're probably going, oil and Q-tips. What the heck does she do with oil and Q-tips? Well, I clean my bobbin case area out with Q-tips and oil. And I do that by putting a couple drops of oil on a Q-tip and going into the bobbin case area and cleaning it out. And so for me, that becomes really important because every time I change my bobbin, I clean it out. Now, we're going to go to the frame and we're going to load and we're going to float and we're going to baste. And some of you are going, what does she mean by float and baste? So I'm going to show you. So we're going to learn how to do that. We're going to talk about positioning and templates. We're going to talk about threads and pantos. And what is a panto? Because, you know, for some people a panto is different than it is for other people. So I'm going to explain what a panto is. And then I'm going to show you about the quilt that I have on the frame. So right now you see my frame. And at the frame I have a few things. I have the frame loaded with just the backing fabric. And I'm going to show that to you. So as I flip that over, you can see right now the only thing that is on my frame is really the backing. The batting is just sitting there. I do load with the red snappers, but the red snappers are also attached to the leaders. Okay? So let's talk about that. You need to find what works best for you. So some of you might have zippers, and there's nothing wrong with zippers. There's nothing wrong with you have choices. The great thing is there are lots of choices out there for you. Your best practices when you're loading the frame are this, and I'm going to move the machine just a little bit so you can see. Right here, there's a red arrow on my leader. I have it on the front side, and I have it on the back side, meaning on the back of my leader, so I can see it both directions. Why is that important? Well, as I roll, I want to know where that center back is, okay? So the center is important here because I'm going to place the center of my backing, the center of my batting, and the center of my quilt all at the same area so that I can keep things straight on the frame. Now your leaders have markings on them, and the markings are going to help you to know how to line things up. So if I were to fold this leader in half, and I would mark this is my center, and you can see on the back, I did with red arrows, just like I did on the other leader that's on my frame. And then I can pin my backing center to the leader. And so that center point becomes really important. Now, you'll learn in future webinars that sometimes I put 10 or 12 things on the frame at once. That's when that center back doesn't matter. So there is a rule of thumb, the center back will help you to keep things straight. And then that way you know about keeping things straight on the frame. So whether you use zippers, whether you use red snappers, whatever it is that you use, you need to find what works best for you. So when you're loading, the other thing that's really handy to have is a centering tape. So this is a centering measuring tape. So with this measuring tape, literally when I go to center, I have a center mark, and I can find center of my quilt and measure out one direction, measure out the other direction, and it should be the same. And as I go, you will find that you keep using this. You find center of your quilt and keep checking to make sure that you're staying center on the frame. Okay? Then the next thing is, once you do that, then we're going to load the batting and backing on the frame together. Now, I'm going to go over to the quilt frame and I'm going to set it up, the machine and the frame. So you'll be able to see it here in front, and then I'm going to move it over to show you how to do it. I'm going to set my Ainsley 26 ESP up for baste. You may not have the ESP, so you may not have a basting feature, okay? So there are two ways to do what I'm going to show you next. One will be the basting feature, and one will be the basting with water-soluble thread. And water-soluble thread you want to keep in a plastic bag so it doesn't disappear when you're not using it, okay? So I want you to think about that. So what you're going to do is you're going to baste the quilt backing and the batting together. So to do that, you have those two options. You can do it with the basting stitch on your machine, or you can do it with the water-soluble basting thread. If you do not have a robotics, if you don't have the Quilt Magician or other things, other robotics to do this, I'm going to show you how to do it without those. So I'm going to push the machine back, all the way back to the take-up rail. I'm going to do a needle up, one stitch, okay? Now I'm going to pull the bobbin thread up, and then once I pull the bobbin thread up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to baste these two items together. So give me just a moment to go and pull the bobbin thread up, and I'll be right back. So if I was going to use the Quilt Magician, I would use the Quilt Magician by having it stitch the X line. But I'm just going to actually travel with the machine lined up against the take-up rail and baste all the way across. So that's basting your quilt. Once you're done with that, then you're going to take your quilt and you're going to figure out what's the best way to lay it out. I'm going to shut the light back off again just so you can see better. So I have this quilt that I'm going to quilt. And it's the only thing I'm putting on the frame today. And I'm going to put it on the frame lengthwise, the length going left to right. That will allow me to get my quilting done faster because I'll have less rolls. So I'm going to straighten the quilt out. And now I'm going to do the same thing again, basting the quilt to the quilt frame. Notice how I hold the hand holding the fabric down as I go. So I'm going to finish off this side here, and then you'll be able to see when I'm done. So now I've basted the quilt in place. So Pamela would like to know what setting or what do I have the basting stitch length set at? If you have a length that you can adjust, adjust it to the longest length. Mine is set up at 1/2 inch right now because I want it secure but not too secure. When I use the water-soluble thread, it doesn't matter what that length is at because the water-soluble thread is going to wash away and separate everything when I'm done. So this, there's lots of things, lots of choices that you have there. Now, Pamela's also asking about the water-soluble thread. The water-soluble thread will only go in the bobbin, okay, not in the top, because once the water-soluble thread is gone, that top thread will just go away. It'll just come off the quilt. So you only want it in one of them. So I wind bobbins with water-soluble thread. And then that makes it nice to be able to put to that. So that's loading the frame. Now, once I do that, now I'm going to make sure that my quilt top is all smooth and everything's in place. And on the list of things that I said we'd talk about, I said we'd talk about floating. Well, floating is the only thing that's attached to the frame is actually my quilt backing. Nothing else is attached to the frame but that backing. So what I want you to see here is that with the backing, now I want to secure everything on the frame. And I use a product that's called frame quilt clips. And they actually hold everything right into place. So let me move the camera so you can see. So those will hold the top and the backing and the batting all together. And as I roll, I take them off and I move them. They're a hand width apart, meaning that my hand can fit between the two, and then I continue to go. So that's really, really important to also secure that. Now we're going to get ready to pick our thread, and picking the thread can probably be the hardest thing to do when you're a new long arm quilter. So I have some thread here. And some bobbins. And let's talk about this. How do you pick the thread? Well, this quilt here, I would ask myself that, do I want to see the quilting or do I want to see the quilt? Okay, so do you want to see the quilting or do you want to see the quilt? If I want to see the quilting, I'm going to pick a color like this. Then I'm going to see the quilting. I'm going to see the stitching. I'd also think about what the weight of thread was when I go to select that. So the weight of thread that I normally use is a 30 or a 40 weight on top. I just like that weight. This is a King Tut. This is 2,000 yards. I'm reading the bottom of it. On the bottom of the cone, it has great information. This is 2,000 yards. It's King Tut 949, and it's a 40 weight. Now, notice that in the bottom of this, there's stickers. Well, you'll be quilting one day, and those stickers will go away. So here's what I do. I take the number that's inside of here, and I come out here, 40, and write it on the cone. Because as soon as I run out of that thread, and I love that thread, then I can't get any more because I don't remember the number, and I don't remember what color it was. I also put the weight on here. It's a 40 weight, 3-ply. Like this. I do that to every single cone of thread that I purchase because when I'm out of it because I probably really liked it, okay? So that's a 40 weight. So if I use this on top, now, there are new quilters here, and I know that some of you might be afraid of putting a different color on the bobbin than you have on top because you're afraid of the tension, okay? Well, I'm going to put this white bobbin on the bottom. And I'm going to teach you about tension and getting that tension correct. Because if you get the tension right, you can do this. You can do a light and a dark. I've even done a black and a white, black on top, white on the bobbin. Now, one of the things I would say to you is that you want to try to keep the bobbin thread a lighter weight or the same as your top thread. Can you do it the other way? Most definitely, but this will not set you up to fail. The other thing is I have all my bobbins in little bobbin savers like this, and I pie them out, meaning that I take and I make a line through this, and if it's a 30 weight, I put it on one side. If it's a 50 weight, I put it on the other side. So don't be afraid to draw on these bobbin savers so you can kind of keep track of what weight of thread is where. And so I just take a black Sharpie and I go right through the center of this and draw right through it, and it's permanent on there. So just a little thing about your bobbins. And don't be afraid of the pre-wounds. So see, I have some pre-wounds here, and these are superior pre-wounds, and they have them in all different colors. So depending on what you're doing, you get quite a bit more on a pre-wound bobbin than you do on a bobbin that you've wound yourself. Okay? Now I'm going to get the bobbin case, and we're going to talk about the bobbin case next, because if we don't get our thread right and we don't get our bobbin right, then our quilting's not going to be correct either. So let me get the bobbin case, and then we're going to talk about that. And I have my levels here. So while I'm getting the bobbin, I'm going to grab the machine. We're going to pull the machine forward, and we're going to topple all that stuff all over the place. And what I want you to do is I want you to put a level across the bed of the machine to the front rail. We just want to make sure that these are pretty close. Now, some of the frames, they're set up where it will always be level. Some of the frames are set up where you have to move them. So I'm on the Phoenix frame, and you'll notice that once I get things loaded on this frame, this is pretty level, but the frames where you have to adjust your side pieces, that's when you want to make sure that this is level. So that's going to help you. You also want to make sure that your machine is square on the frame. So you can use a level sideways to adjust to check to make sure that your machine is level on your carriage, because one of the things I said on there is you want to make sure that's level. So check all of those things, then check your frame in the back and check your frame on the side. So literally, I have 3 small levels and I have 1 very large level that I level with. Now I have my bobbin case. So here's my bobbin case. And I'm going to take the bobbin out. And I have my bucket of cotton swabs. I take my machine oil and I drop a drop of machine oil on the end of the cotton swab. And then I come inside my bobbin case, clean it all out. Look at what I got out of there. And I just cleaned it, but I have been quilting. And then I do the same thing in the bobbin case area where I pulled the bobbin out of. Okay? You also want to make sure that no fuzz is getting in this little spot here. So sometimes you have to take a little pin to get some of those threads out of there. Okay? Now, depending on what machine you have, I have what's known as a pigtail. So I'm going to show you how that works. Right now, I have a 30 weight bobbin. If I have my bobbin case set up for 30 weight bobbin, I can always leave it set up for 30 weight bobbin, the tension on it. When I put it in here at 30 weight, I don't have to use this little pigtail. That's that little piece right there. Okay? When I have something that's lighter weight than 30 weight, I put it in the pigtail, which puts more tension on that thread. So instead of me adjusting my bobbin case all the time, all I need to do is put it through that pigtail for a lighter weight thread. So I've literally adjusted my bobbin case to So Beautiful with 30 weight thread in the bobbin, but a lighter weight thread, 50 weight is lighter weight than 30 weight. I put it through that little pigtail. And then that puts more tension on the thread for me. Then, when I'm putting it in the bobbin case area, you don't have to hold this little arm up. It's not like a home sewing machine. When you lift that arm, the bobbin doesn't fall out. This bobbin will fall out. You want to listen for a click. Now, I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear it click when I put it in, but we're going to try. I'm going to put it over here beside me. One of the benefits of floating your fabric is that you can get to the bobbin at any position. So if I bring the machine over here, not sure if you heard it click, but it's clicked in there. The first thing that I would do is I would do a full rotation with my needle. So I just jogged the needle to make sure that the bobbin was seated, and it is seated. And then I'm done with that. So another best practice. The other thing is pulling those threads up to the top. That's a best practice. Now, on my list, I had something called self-threading or easy threading hand sewing needles. And some of you are wondering why. So here's my easy threading hand sewing needles. I have them in my hand here. I'm going to pull the bobbin thread up to the top right here where we're at. And I bury my threads. So a self-threading or easy threading hand sewing needle thread into the needle without threading it. So I just threaded that needle by just popping the thread into it. And now I can bury that within my quilt after I've knotted it. So that's what an easy threading hand sewing needle is used for. I use them all the time. That was a trick I learned when I went to Paducah, one of the first times I went. All right, let's move our thread off the frame and let's get to our next little lesson. Now, how many of you like to free motion? So a few of you. And Teddy says, not me. Some of you say not me. My friend Barbara would say not me too. She wants to, but it's kind of scary for a lot of people. Okay, so I want you to get some painter's tape. And what I want you to do is I want you to move your machine forward. Now, Shirley, you might have seen this trick when you've taken a class from me before. I want you to move the machine forward, and then I want you to move it back about a ½ inch. Then I want you to put some painter's tape right here. This is one of my favorite best practices when free motioning. If I put a piece of painter's tape all the way across my quilt, when I'm free motioning, I can see where I'm going to hit the wall before I get there. How many of you have hit the wall when you go to free motion and forget it's there? Hitting the wall is when you bring your machine forward and you hit the wall. You hit the C of the machine. So some of you are already saying, oh, that's a great idea. Never thought of that. Well, it is one of my favorite ideas to put painter's tape there because it gives you a good visual. Now, they make it in different widths and they make it in different colors, okay? So the green is not as tacky as, say, the blue, and there's purple and there's pink. I usually do this with a color that I can see on my quilt. So you can see this blue on the quilt really well. Okay, but maybe if I was doing a blue quilt, I'd need to use the green or the lavender. So I actually have the painter's tape in all different colors and all different sizes because I use the painter's tape for other things. Okay, so let me move this piece of painter's tape here and show you the next thing that I do. So we're going to do a pantograph. Pamela says she's been in the middle and hit the circle and the bump and then hit the wall. So, yep, it happens to all of us. So here's my panto. And what is a panto? A panto is a printed pattern for quilting. Now, let me tape it up and get it ready for us. So I have the Quilt Magician on this machine here, and I can record with the Quilt Magician. So I have now placed my pantograph on the fabric on top of my frame. I'm then going to, let me move the camera up. I'm then going to go to the robot, and I'm going to select my area. Go back up. I'm going to go to the robot and select my area, but what I want to do is I want to free motion, and I want to record it. So here I can save it to the Quilt Magician or to the USB stick, and I can start and now record it. Well, why not record the pantograph in front of me here instead of at the back of the machine? At the back of the machine, for a lot of us, it's kind of hard. It's kind of like driving, looking out the window at the yellow line when you're driving. We only do that in the fog in San Diego, or San Francisco. But the thing that I like to do is put this up here. So a pantograph is any printed pattern. Well, the great thing that I have here is if I have the record feature, I only have to record one element, one repeat. So if you look at the design on the screen here, let's just say that we start here. We stop here. We record one element. That's it. That's all we need to record. Well, I laid the golden threads paper up there. That's that golden piece. If you want, you can actually draw the one element on golden threads paper or draw what it is that you want to record on golden threads paper and then have the ability to record it or make it to fit. I won't tell you this person's name, but this person says that they've had their robotic system for 2 years and never used the record feature. It's huge. I love the record feature because if there was an element in this quilt that I like, let's just say I liked these butterflies here, I could take a picture of these, enlarge it, record it, and voila, I have it as a big design. So pantographs can be quilted up front, or they can be quilted in the back. Now, if they're quilted in the back, you'll need a laser. So I have a laser here just to show you. So you would follow the pantograph with the laser, okay? Now, this laser light is another one of my favorite little things. This laser light is actually going to be attached so that it lands in the eye of the needle so that I always know where my needle lands in my fabric. So I want you to think about that maybe you want to get a second laser that's attached to the front of your machine that you can then have it point to where the needle lands in the fabric. Or you could record your pieces up here. Maybe it's a smaller pantograph following the laser up front and stitching towards the back. So Yeah, opening up a new world to a lot of you and a different way to think. So, just a few things to think about. Now, I did bring some batting up here just to show you the packaging. So this is a package of Quilter's Dream, and it comes with the instructions. What I tend to do with this is take this, put it in a 3-ring binder, the paper, and one small sample of this batting so that I can go back and I can feel it and see what it feels like and have kind of a little notebook of all of my batting. So just something to think about with batting. The same thing, Hobbs comes in a roll like this, so you could do the same thing with this. This is Hobbs Fusible. Has great information on the back, why fusible, how do you do the fusible. So a couple things about the batting. Okay, while I'm going to the frame to get a couple more things, you can type some questions if you have, and I will be right back. One other thing with the batting before I leave to go do that is you can always pick up little sample pieces at the different stores too, at your quilt shops and things like that. So I keep those handy too. Now, we talked a little bit about bobbins. My question is, how many of you know how to wind a bobbin on your machine without moving your machine? Let's see how many of you know the answer to that question. How do you wind a bobbin on your machine without your machine moving? Uh-oh, Ruth Ann knows. Good, good. And I'll read some of these little things that everybody has here. Teddy says that they tried to record, but they had to be real steady with their hands or they made a mistake in everything that they do. Okay, here's a couple things I want you to think about. For you, Teddy, I don't know you, but you need to figure out what allows you to relax. So maybe it's music, and that will make you dance with your machine. You've got to find that relaxing moment and what allows you to relax. And you have to not be hard on yourself. Don't look at every little thing that you do as a mistake. You need to look at it that you're learning and that it's not as bad as you thought it was. So here's what I want everybody to practice doing. Just put a practice piece on the frame. It could be muslin. It can be, a cheater cloth. And I want you to write letters, meaning I wrote to my grandchildren the first time, and I put, Grandma loved you, had fun at the park, we had fun camping, I loved fishing with you. I want you to write letters, not alphabet letters. And as you write, it will be all lowercase letters. You're going to see, because that's in your head, things move much freer. But because you hadn't practiced that pantograph, it's not as easy. So one of the things that I had on the PowerPoint was a grid. And here's where this comes in handy. This is a quilter's grid. Put a couple things up here to hold it. Okay, so this is a quilter's grid. And what I do is I lay this over the quilt, or I lay this over my pantographs, and I use a wet erase marker. Okay, has to be a wet erase. And I draw the designs. So let me grab my wet erase and I'll show you how this works. And some of you are asking, why wet erase? Well, if I use a dry erase and my arm rubs on it, I rub it all off. Okay, so there's my grid. You can't see it, but it's clear plastic with a grid. And I'm going to draw with a blue marker. So maybe I have something in my head I'd like to free motion, or maybe I want to see how a design will look. So let's just say that I'm going to design in this space here. What this allows me to do is literally draw out what I'm going to put in that space. So depending on what I'm looking to design or looking to record or looking to free motion, this frees up my thought process. So here, maybe I want to do pearls. Now, some of you think pearls are circles or ovals. Well, I'm here to tell you that they're actually figure eights. So just putting pearls or pebbles in that space allowed me to try it before I do it. So I want you to think about that the plastic over that really helps when you're free motioning. Okay. Some people have the answer and some people said they don't, and I appreciate that. So when you're winding the bobbin, when you want to do it without your machine stitching, you're going to unthread your needle and put it into manual mode. So non-stitch regulated is manual mode, okay? And manual mode is strictly non-stitch regulated. So that means that the needle is constantly going. And if the needle is constantly going, that means that we can wind a bobbin without our machine moving. So something to think about. I always like to tell people that because a lot of people don't know. You don't have to have your machine moving. Well, what I do when I do a bobbin manual mode is that's when I oil my machine too, because now I'm not moving the machine. My machine's not even over my fabric. I can oil the machine. It's lubricating the machine while I'm winding a bobbin, and I get all of that done at once. So every morning when I come to the quilting studio and I want to quilt something and I don't have a bobbin, that's the first thing I do is I wind a bobbin and oil my machine all at the same time. So that was the grid. Now, there are other ways to do your design on the quilt also. Pounce is one of them. And I use Pounce with the golden threads paper or with stencils. So if I were going to draw a design on the paper, I could go to my home sewing machine and needle punch it. No thread, just have the needle go up and down through the golden threads paper. And then I take the Pounce and I go over top of this and get the design on my quilt. So that's really important, is that there are lots of ways to do this. You will find which one works best for you. For me, preferences, I like to see it, so I draw it out. So I usually draw it out on the grid or draw it out on the golden threads paper and then go from there to record it. And Pounce comes in a couple different ways. You can get blue that irons away, or white that brushes away, or white that irons away. And I just saw there's a new one that's pink. So there are lots of choices when it comes to Pounce. So we've got some more questions coming in. I'll get these answered for you. How often do you oil your machine? You really want to oil your machine depending on how often you quilt, okay, about every 8 to 10 hours of stitching. Here's the thing to think about. If you leave your machine sit, you've got to turn that on and get that oil going in the machine. And you're only going to oil it a couple, 2 or 3 drops at the top of the machine. And you can check the dipstick in the bottom of the machine and make sure that the oil is good. Okay, and you may have to oil down there also. But the more you use your machine, the better it is, because that's what's keeping it lubed. So, you know, that's a great question. And don't be afraid to check the dipstick and oil it. And here's a nice helpful tip. If you get oil on your fabric, keep some cornstarch in your sewing room, because the cornstarch will absorb the oil out of the fabric so that it won't damage it. And you can over oil your machine, Pamela, so that's why you want to check the dipstick and see about how much oil is down in your reservoir area, because it has a wicking system where it self-lubricates as you quilt. I quilt about 12 hours a day when I quilt, and I oil my machine at least once during that day. Now, with the ESP, it does have a maintenance program that'll tell you when to oil your machine also. So you can, you know, be sure to have that set up for how often you want to oil it. A couple other things I like to show, okay, when I teach my best practices class. Free motion is hard. When your hands are out here on these handlebars, free motion is hard. And a couple things about free motion is I like to use what are called micro maneuver handles. What these handles are is they allow me to quilt flat. My extension table would be on my machine and my hands will be flat, and I can hold my hands flat and stitch. So that's one way you might try to use the micro maneuver handles to see if you can free motion quilt easier with that than you can, say, up on handlebars up here. So there's a couple different ways to try it. Donna said she was told it was okay to use baby powder instead of cornstarch. Well, here's the thing about baby powder, is baby powder has chemicals and it has scents, perfumes and things in it. So you can use it, but it may leave a stain itself, where cornstarch is pure cornstarch. It's natural. So I would, you know, just be careful if you're going to use baby powder and keep that in mind. Sherry would like to know, when's the best time to use manual mode versus regulated mode? Manual mode is non-stitch regulated. So if I was going to thread paint and have long stitches and inconsistent stitches that I chose to, I would definitely use manual mode. If I wanted a regulated stitch that's always the same at specific time, I would definitely use the regulated mode. So there are times for both. I have a piece here that's non-stitch regulated. Let me grab it and show you. And the micro maneuver handles, they're on the frame. So I'm going to go over in front of the machine and I'll show you. I sit at my machine and use these. And I'll slide over here and I'll show you how they work. So they work with your hand sitting on the base. So here is a small sample that's non-stitch regulated. So let me get the camera to focus. So that's inconsistent stitches. Specifically, I wanted that. So there are some people that do very well with manual mode also, and keeping their stitches consistent, and that's okay. Now, let's just talk about maintenance of our machine a little bit. I suggest that everybody find themselves one of these mini attachments. You can use canned air, but think about where all that stuff is going that you're blowing. It's going all over your sewing studio. So I find it better to use this little mini attachment and take it all away instead of blowing it all away. So just a couple things there that I like to use when I'm maintaining my machine. My husband also picked me up one of these little toolbox kits that I have right by my sewing machine, and all of this stuff sits in a basket. So here are the things that I have in this little basket that sits right close to my machine. And I want you to see two other things. Let's see if I can get it. You see this little basket over here? There's a basket back here. That's a razor holder, okay, for a shower. And that hangs off of the side of my machine with suction cups, or you could use it with an industrial Velcro, and that holds needles and a screwdriver and things like that. And then on this side, you probably saw me grab the scissors earlier. See the scissors hanging here? They're hanging off of one of those command strip hooks. So this little thing's close at hand. So let's see what I have in my toolbox that I cannot live without. Extra needles. They're a 134 SAN needle. You can use anything from an 11 to a size 18. The needle is going to change with your fabric and your thread. Lighter weight thread, you want smaller needles. Silk fabric, you want smaller needles. Denim fabric, you want heavier thread, heavier needles. So think about that. There are 2 feet that are extra for the machine. One is a ruler foot. This is much larger than the foot that comes on the machine. This is so that you can line up rulers to the edge of this without getting caught. Okay? So the rulers and ruler feet, and then there's an open toe foot. So if I'm recording something, I'm going to use this open toe foot. You can see it in the white better. There we go. I'm going to use this open toe foot so I can see where I'm going. I also carry one of the surgical seam rippers by my machine all the time, because if I have to rip something, this seam ripper is much easier for me to do that with. And then a couple other things I have by my machine. These are called strain release pads and zip ties. And what I do with those is I manage my cords on my machine. So a best practice is to get those cords out of your way whenever possible. So I use a cord cover like this, and then the zip ties and the strain release pads. The other thing that I said we talk about is bungees and the fabric and the batting. So the last thing I want to leave you with is your backing and batting should be a minimum of 3 inches wider than your top, because you need space up here to put the backing on the frame. You need space on the sides to hold whatever type of bungee system you have. And you also need space if you have an edge-to-edge design that goes off the fabric. It starts off the fabric. You've got to have batting and backing to accommodate that. So you just want to make sure that that's big enough, okay? So don't short yourself on that stuff. Vicky's asking, what about a horizontal spool pin for your sewing machine? Well, you have a couple options. Let me grab something I have here. It's a great question. This is called a thread stem, S-T-E-M, thread stem. Okay, are you ready? I love this thing because there's some times when you need vertical and there are some times when you need horizontal. So I'm going to bring the machine over and I'm going to move the camera up. So you see the spool pin. So here I have my stylus and I have a spool pin holder piece for your cones, and you want to make sure you use those so the cones don't rock. And this is what it is. And it actually goes on the spool pin like that, and then I can put a spool on my machine, vertical or horizontal. It's a wonderful little tool. Now, I hope you learned a lot of great things in helping you to have best practices at the frame. And there are lots of other webinars coming up, so you'll want to check the Tin Lizzie website. I have a blog, So Special with Denise, S-E-W, So Special with Denise. You can Google search it, and I list them there also. So I hope you learned a lot. Take it to your frame and machine in your quilting studio and have lots of fun quilting.